This is Kelly.
And this is Amy.
And you're listening to Diary of a Death Investigator. Amy's doing the robot on her side.
It's what I call the mannequin.
Oh, yeah, because I sent her a thing on Instagram. She went off on her rant about the mannequin a couple episodes ago. And so I sent her an Instagram video of someone saying, well, they thought it was a mannequin.
Let me just tell you guys something. It's never a mannequin. And I'll just end it on that.
I don't even know where people get mannequins. So we're on episode 19. We're calling it The Judge, Public Defender.
Dun, dun, dun.
You can tell us once you start the case why you're calling it that. I do have a trigger warning. This story contains content about suicide. If you or someone you know is in crisis, help is just 3 numbers away. 988 is the suicide and crisis hotline, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week across the United States. And again, if you're listening in another country and you have a hotline that we can post online, please share it with us. You can email us at kelly@diaryofadeathinvestigator.com or message us on Instagram at diaryofadeathinvestigator. Before you start on the case for today, I just want to go back and talk about last week's episode.
Which part?
And the zombie spiders.
Okay. I think that was your most, how do I want to word this? Reflecting back upon it now, that was the part that I feel like you remember the most about the entire case because that's what we're still talking about, obviously.
I assume that everybody who listened Googled zombie spiders after the last episode. Because I sure did. And let me tell you, when you Google zombie spiders, a couple of things pop up. So what you were talking about, how the Rice University had done experiment with them, where the zombie spiders grip stuff.
Research.
I saw a picture of a zombie spider that was like all white, and it's because it had fungus on it. So basically, like the fungus takes over and the spider becomes a zombie. But when you start Googling zombie spiders, other things pop up, like zombie ants.
Oh, I didn't know that was a
zombie
thing.
Wasp.
Is it all from the same thing? The fungus?
No. Some of them's from fungus. The ants are from fungus, which I hate ants. If there's one thing I can't stand, it's ants.
They're very persistent little dudes, I will say.
Very fascinated by them. I think they're really, really smart, but I just don't like them in my house because they're everywhere.
They can be fascinating outside.
Yeah. But no, so I guess there's some insects that I think there's zombie cockroaches that can get stung by a wasp. Oh. And then the wasp implants eggs in them.
Yeah.
And then the eggs hatch and eat or suck the blood out of them or whatever. But anyways, there's crazy things out there. So I think...
Because now I'm like, is that really a zombie or a vampire?
Oh, yeah.
I'm getting into technicalities because I'm like, that's kind of what insects do to people when they die. They just use them for a hatching, nice little body with food.
I guess it takes control over them. So there's wasps that will either inject a spider, and the spider then will lay this or create this whole web. And at first they're like, oh, that's just natural because the spider does it anyway. But the study was actually creating a different kind of web for this wasp.
It's a parasitic creature that has a mutual relationship.
It's just gross is what it is. And it's scary.
I teach zoology now too, so I know all the things.
Yeah. Well, anyways, I don't want to know anything else about zombie creatures because then I was like, well, what else is a zombie?
Well, people, because I tell you stuff all the time about don't ever stay in the morgue at night because I still swear those places are haunted.
I don't know that that's zombie though. I always kind of thought maybe people who had Ebola, because it eats them from the inside out, would be kind of considered zombie-ish.
Now you're just talking crazy because their brains are gone.
Isn't that what zombies are?
Ebola goes for the brain.
Well, I'm just saying. They don't have to
brains
eat brains.
To find brains. Come on, Kelly. We're totally off topic.
I just thought it was really funny, and it did scare the poop out of Marisa, so that was funny too.
I'm so glad. That makes me happy. Yes. Sometimes you do tend to go off topic. That's a lot of my fault. Our dad did actually say that. Sometimes we tend to do that. But it makes it fun.
Well, going back to the case, the judge.
Public defender.
Mm-hmm.
So you will figure out why here as the case goes on. I had been out of work for a while, off of work for some months due to health reasons. And so this was right when I came back onto work, I was like still kind of energized, like, man, I got all this rest for these months. And I'm like, I am ready to go. So I don't know why I volunteered to do this case that was out of my district. I feel like that's when all these weird cases start like that. It was like, why did I take this case? There again, it was a state agency that was involved with with one of my least favorite on-scene crime scene people. It's the guy that tends to mess things up on scene. He just makes it really hard for me to show up and be excited to see him. And especially when I'm like, why do you call me 4 hours early if I'm just going to sit in my truck?
He's prepared.
Overly.
I can appreciate somebody who's overly prepared.
No, not me. I'm like, I could be sleeping in my bed, not my truck. And you're messing up my scene. I don't look at it as their scene. It's my scene. So my body's getting less fresh, more stiff. Yeah, I got this call. Originally it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. And like I said, out of my area, it was like down in the southern part of the state. And I just feel like the most bizarre things happen there. And it's like out in the wilderness and out in the country. So crazy things can happen there and no one would ever know. Let's just say that. I get this call, like 1 o'clock in the morning. It takes me like a solid 2 hours to get there. And then let me make a note that I get off of my shift, my 24-hour shift at 7 o'clock that morning. And so I'm sitting there waiting, and I'm talking to the sheriffs that are on scene already, and then the state agency that's on scene. And they're like, well, we're short-handed, so we still got to process the scene. I'm like, of course you do. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm just going to go get some coffee. I got to drive like another 15 minutes to the next town to go get it, but I'll be back. So it's one of those towns, like they have one little corner store, and that's about it. You got to get there right when it opens so you can get the fresh donuts. I'm like, all right, I'll be back. So I'm sitting there and I'm waiting. Hours go by. It's like 6 o'clock in the morning. They're still not done. 7 o'clock rolls around. They're still not done. I've been waiting at the scene now for roughly 4 hours. This lady died, or is pronounced dead, at 1 o'clock in the morning.
So I have a question, because you're saying that they're processing the scene, but what is it when they're processing the scene?
It's really just them documenting everything with pictures first, and then they're measuring everything. So anything as far as evidence or what they perceive as evidence that's important to them on the scene, but also things that is like blood spatter, right? And blood spatter is so tricky because when students ask me, like, what classes did you use from high school, like in your life later on? I'm like, well, I will say I did actually use some geometry for like certain things. You do like crime scene reconstruction, and then you use that again for like blood spatter because it like involves physics. So you have to know angles. So blood spatter pertains to angles. And so they will actually do shots of different angles. They'll get measurements of different angles, but they also, I think I've talked about the Pharaoh earlier.
Yeah.
So they take like detailed pictures of every room, which basically that just helps them for when they go to court later on. It just basically just completely reconstructs the room in detail, like 3D form. So it's really helpful for them when they testify in court, but it's like giving them like the scene in court, if that makes sense.
So it is important for them then to take their time and process it.
Yes, but they don't need to call me when they get there because they know it's going to take them 8 million years, especially if it's one person. That's a lot for one person to do. I'm like, well, you drove up in 3 trucks and only one of you is processing the scene. What are you guys doing? So yeah, when I get there, they basically give me this rundown that it seems suspicious to them. And even in the news, of course, even before I've even seen the body, they're like, suspicious scene in such and such county, state agency says. And I'm like, well, isn't that lovely, state agency, since I haven't even seen the body? I'm literally looking at the news as I'm sitting in my truck watching them. I'm like, interesting. I'm like, well, we will see about that. 7 o'clock rolls around. I don't even remember what time. The sun is already up at this time. And so I'm like, okay, I've been here 6 hours. I did fall asleep for a little bit at this time. Actually went and was nice enough to go buy donuts for everyone on scene and come back and share them.
That's nice.
I mean, the sheriffs there, they weren't the ones that were making me wait. It was the agency, so they could process the scene while everyone else is eating donuts. So, kind of how I feel about it. So, by the time I'm finally able to get inside the house, it's a mobile home, and I think it was only a single wide. And then outside of that, they kind of had like a little farm. So they had a barn, and they had some goats and chickens, and then there was like an RV parked out there as well. Someone was living in that. So inside the residence, there was living an elderly mother, 72 years old, and her two daughters who are like in their 40s. And then I believe it was one of the son-in-laws that was actually staying in the RV at the time. So there are technically 4 people living on the acreage at the time of the incident. When they get the call, so dispatch gets the call for the sheriff's department, they're also familiar with them as well, which we'll find out. The decedent ends up being the elderly woman. She's 72 years old. They find her down in the bathroom, and there is a ton of blood. And it was by the son-in-law that was in the trailer, or he was brother-in-law, something like that. Ex-something brother. It was one of those in-law kind of situations. What he had stated to the dispatcher was he heard something from inside the house. And so he goes over to the house, and the daughters are like sleeping on the couches in there. And normally decedent is also sleeping in like this recliner, like one of those single recliner chairs, because she has like a slew of health problems. And so like that's the most comfortable place for her to sleep. And she also needs oxygen. So she really can't go anywhere without oxygen or like a cane. It's easier for her to get in and out of this recliner chair. So the way that he finds her is he's like, okay, well, where's she at? She's not in her recliner.
Wait. So he said the 2 were still sleeping on the couch and he heard the noise outside?
Yes, this is quotes. Heavily air quoted. Yeah. So there was a lot that just seemed afoul with this, but he goes looking for her, and then he's just like, okay, well, she must be in the bathroom, right? And so he walks back to the bathroom, which one of the daughters is like, what's going on? Why are you in here? And so she goes back there and she goes, oh, well, yeah, it looks like she fell and hit her head because there's like a ton of blood on the ground. So he's like, huh, okay. Also, why is there a gun in the sink with a washcloth? Weird, interesting.
What?
Yeah. And also, this bathroom is like maybe 30 feet away from where they were sleeping in this living room. So either they have like really bad sleep apnea or their TV was turned on really loud. I don't know. But I'm thinking she had to have had help to go to the bathroom because her cane wasn't even in the bathroom with her, and she needed her oxygen tank, which was still over by her recliner chair. That's weird.
Yes.
Yeah, the one daughter just said, I'm a heavy sleeper. Okay, whatever. You know, I'm just in here writing my notes. I just work here kind of thing.
And this is above my pay grade.
Yeah, exactly. That's my phrase I use all the time now. And it's like, I just work here. I don't make the decisions. I just work here. So by the time I am finally able to come in, I'm like, so they said that she fell and hit her head on the counter here? They're like, yeah. I was like, that is a lot of blood for hitting your head. And I was like, what does the gun have to do with this? And they're like, well, we didn't touch or remove her. I was like, well, that's reassuring. Okay, I'm glad you guys didn't do that for once. But I'm like looking at this whole scene, and the front door literally walks in to your right's living room. Then it's like to your left is the kitchen, and that bathroom is literally right off the kitchen. It is literally like 30 feet away. And so when I'm walking over there, I'm like turning on all these lights that were off, and I see blood spatter in the hallway right outside the bathroom door. I'm like, oh, well, did you see this spray pattern outside the door here? And they're like, oh, no.
For 6 hours, they processed the scene and didn't see it?
Yes, Kelly, yes. It drove me nuts because you know what then they had to do all of a sudden? Then they decided they needed to process that little tiny space right outside the bathroom door. Oh, and I said, well, let's see. Do we see a spray pattern? on the frame of the door? Surrounding the frame? No. I was like, okay, so maybe if we kind of pull the door shut a little bit. Oh, look! There's blood. So the door had been partially open.
When it happened.
Yes, and this is literally the world's tiniest bathroom. It's so small. There's a little tiny shower and then literally just room for a toilet and a little single sink. It is so small. The amount of space that you could even walk through is maybe like 3 by 3. Just even that's like tiled for a room to walk in. And the woman is laying like in an L shape next to the toilet. So it looked like she had collapsed down next to the toilet. So her head is in between the toilet and the wall and the bathtub. So the single shower there. Looking down, I'm like, okay, there's a big puddle of blood here. This is a weird position. And then I look back, I'm like, okay, so the door is partially open because there's a spray pattern here. And then you see a big void. We call things voids where it's like, then it's clean. So that's where it would line up with the door frame from the inside and then hit the wall and go out. So the clean part on the inside of the door, it was one of those sliding wooden doors.
Oh, yeah. Like the pocket doors.
Exactly. So it only had the spray pattern on so much of the door. And then after that, there was a big void. So I was like, okay, well, we know it's partially open. I'm like, she's in a really weird position to, okay, I was like, so what's her medical history again? I'm like, this just looks really weird. I was like, I don't want to touch anything yet until I know things. So she had 2 strokes, which left her left side completely paralyzed since. So she cannot walk by herself. She needs a cane.
Oh, and the cane's not there.
Exactly. Also, we see a gun there, right? Which I haven't looked at her yet, but I'm like, there's a lot of blood. So this gun has to be involved somehow. It's like, she can't use her left hand to brace this gun. So secondly, concerning. I'm like, man, this is really tough. So I was like, okay. You guys get your pictures and crap done since you didn't see this like 5 hours ago. And then we can start my stuff. So I'm standing there and I'm just waiting. I was like, well, we can do stuff with the gun then, since you guys at least got pictures of that in the sink. So in the sink, there's a wet washcloth with like blood in the sink, which it looked like they had tried to wash it down. And then the gun is wet.
The dumbest criminals on the planet.
Let me tell you, sometimes I wonder, I look at people and I'm just like, when you were processing this in your brain, you thought this was a good idea. You live out in the middle of nowhere. You could have hidden this body. But there again, I went to school for this. We can't all be blessed, I guess, with the brains.
What it tells me is they don't watch Yellowstone. Because if you watch Yellowstone...
No, forensics files, Kelly. Come on.
Yeah, but I feel like they're a little bit more cutthroat on Yellowstone. I feel like the whole scene was set up like a Yellowstone scene. They had the trailer there. They had another trailer. They had all the animals. They could have dug a hole on this acreage.
Feed her to the goats.
Things they could have done. All right, going back to the washcloth.
Goats eat everything, man. Why would they be picky about this?
Gross.
I'm just saying. Which, by the way, your puppies and your kitties will eat you. If they get hungry enough and you die, they will eat you. I've seen cats eat out someone's heart.
Oh, that's gross too. No, thank you.
I'm just saying.
Oh, if they're hungry, I gotta Google this. This will be my next Google.
Yeah, especially little terriers, little dogs, they'll literally eat your face off. They start licking, they're like, that's tasty. And they're like, ooh, that's meat. I'm really hungry. Like, they wait a couple days at least. Like, I feel like dogs would wait a little bit. I'd like to think at least Stevie wouldn't give in, but Mabel maybe. Now, Sasha the cat, she'd be like, I don't care. You haven't fed me in 6 hours. I'm eating you. Literally, this lady had this huge hole in her chest. And I was like, that cat literally ate out her heart. For real. True story. I've seen people's faces eaten off.
Maybe she was heartless.
Well, she is now. Anyways, okay, that's off topic. Random rant. Just so you guys know, just saying, you better make sure your animals have lots of food always, just in case. So, in the sink, we have this gun. And this isn't just any ordinary gun. This is a gun that will pack a punch. It is a revolver, and a special revolver. It's a Taurus Judge Public Defender. And what is so special about these revolvers is that they actually take shot shells, like 410 shot shells.
Ooh.
Yes. Not like something you'd ordinarily have for a revolver. what that should tell you, if you're familiar with any type of shotgun types of shooting, is there's going to be a hard kick on this, okay? So this woman who's 72 years old, who is paralyzed on her left side, you're trying to tell me that she was able to use this gun on herself is basically what her daughters were implying at this point, okay? So I'm like, there is no way, no. So I'm sitting here being like the instigator, like, there is no way. They're not even crying over there. They're whispering about something. I was like, I'm suspicious. So I'm like, okay, let's look at this gun first. And one spent shell casing, which was expected. And of course, we didn't see any projectile holes. That's typically something that you wouldn't see with something that is a close contact type of shell wound, because anything that's going to be a shotgun or shell type of shot is going to do that splaying pattern like we've been talking about. And if it's further away, you would see it splayed out with defects to the wall or to the door. So they would be like penetrated around the body. Didn't see any of those.
Yeah, she wouldn't have a head anymore because it's close, right? If it's that close to her head, and let's just say she shot herself in the head, is what I would assume they were implying, because you would see something else. She would not have a head anymore.
Exactly, Kelly, exactly.
Ooh, I didn't even know that.
Good.
I'm learning.
You are learning. We're teaching you. Kelly's learning stuff with everyone else. It's fun. So we get pictures of the gun. And I'm like, okay, so did you guys also get this spray pattern that's on the floor around, So we're seeing all kinds of voids from on the door and then some voids on the floor as well, kind of right in front of where the door would be. There again, it's like a 3x3. You can't move much. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to move the body so that I can examine her now. And at this point, she's already stiff in rigor. And so she's like bent into this like L shape. So I'm like, fantastic. I have to get her out of that room first from in between the toilet. And she was kind of a tall woman for 72. I was impressed.
I mean, you don't necessarily shrink. It doesn't mean that you're going to get shorter when you get older.
Osteoarthritis, Kelly.
More science.
Yes. Learn things, Kelly. Catch up. Let's go. Keep in step with me. So I'm like telling them put the body back here. And they're like, oh, don't mess up the blood spatter. And I'm like, you had your chance. Get out of my way. I'm like, all right, we're putting her in the bag. And then we're going to move her to where I can actually like have room to like take pictures of her. We move her out of there finally. And then I actually have to like break some of the rigor so that she'll like lay flat so I can get pictures. And when we pull her out of there and I roll her to her back, you know what I see?
No.
She has a big old shot right in the middle of her chest.
Oh.
Big old gunshot wound. And I'm like, would you look at that? All right. So, little different than what we all thought. Yes. It was really crazy because I specifically remember looking at her shirt. All that blood was from her chest. So she did actually have a head wound. She initially had to hit her head prior, but it had been a healed over wound and it had like a really small laceration. So very, very small cut. Not enough to do enough bleeding to cause that kind of bleed on the ground. So all that blood that was on the floor in that bathroom was from her chest. And literally it had penetrated her heart, the gunshot wound. So it's like bleeding into her chest and then from the bullet wound out of her chest. Because if she wasn't laying that way, it would have just bled into her body, like into her body cavity. I pull her out and then we lay her flat and then her shirt. So I was able to actually pull her shirt down where you could see the soot on her shirt from the gunpowder. So I know it's a close or hard contact wound to her chest. And this type of gun packs so much power. It's what we call a flailed chest. So if you're like a paramedic or like a ER doctor or someone who does chest compressions, sometimes you break or crack ribs. So when you break or crack ribs and then the chest will just give away after a certain point, it's what they call flail rib cage. And so it literally had like flailed her ribs. And so I was like pressing around her ribs and they were just like shattered. And I could stick my like whole index finger into the bullet wound. I was like, that is a pretty significant gunshot wound. I was like, she probably bled out very quickly. That is interesting. So you document the gunshot wound in the shirt. That's always super important because the state agency will collect that later. But we keep that on her at the time so that the doctors can document that, because you look at that for trajectory angle. And you also kind of look at like those little L-shaped measurement cues. They're like, you know, the cue cards, the yellow ones that have like the numbers for evidence. We also have those that have the measuring on them and they're L-shaped. And so like we'll line those up with projectile holes and stuff too. So you can kind of match up like the injury size. So you can do that with like the shirt and like match that up with the projectile hole of like the chest. And I turned her over, so like looking at her back to see if any of those pellets were in her back. Because some of them could have gone all the way through, with it being a contact wound like that and so much force from that gun. And then, of course, we looked at her hands and stuff too. Now, with it being a revolver, it did have the hammer, pull down the hammer, right? So she did have a small, what we call a bite from the gun, from the hammer. They get that kind of like in the webbing of your hand. And I was like, okay, well, that is interesting. But I was like, is that from the gun or could it be from something else? Because she had so many other like injuries to her body. That's why we take such close pictures of the hands at the time, because you're also looking for defects in the hands, like if they were holding the gun, and then basically how the pulling of the blood made an artifact around that, if there was like a gun in their hand at the time. So, like I said, the only thing to her head was like she had already had this healed head wound and then just a really small head laceration that just looked like a really, almost like a paper cut type of wound to the head. So if she fell and hit her head, that's not what ultimately would have caused her death. Well, we know what did. Of course, talking to the daughters, they're like, we don't know, we sleeping. So,
no, you weren't.
Yeah, well, come to find out that over the last couple of months, she had been like in and out of the nursing home because she had had so many problems. Like she needed palliative care pretty much because she could not take care of herself. And her daughters said, oh, we'll move in, we'll help you take care of yourself. But really, they were just wanting to take over the farm. And we saw like some of her banking statements. Woman had money in the bank. We're like, did the daughters kill her for this money? Because the daughters, we found out, were like behind on things. And we're like, did they do this to their mom? Because like, this just looks suspicious. Because like all of her banking statements were literally like sitting in envelopes on the counter. And I just remember like going through, like taking pictures. I'm like, oh, this just looks even more suspicious for them because like they did not have access to the money. She was the only one. And she was talking about selling the farm. And they're like, no, don't sell the farm because they wanted to grow weed.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So I'm like, oh, my mind is like, I'm like, oh my gosh, how is this not suspicious, right? At this point, I'm like, this woman who can only use the right side of her body, who did not take her oxygen tank with her to the bathroom or her cane with her to the bathroom. I'm like, this is so weird, right? There's no way. She had been in a nursing home, in and out. So like this had happened, it was September 8th. She had been in the nursing home and had been released from the nursing home August 31st. So what, 9 days? Not even 9 days, because this was early morning hours. So 8 days. She had been released for 8 days prior to her death. And so she was in the nursing home because she had had like these 2 strokes. She just needed more care, like further care. And so I think she'd even had like a knee replaced. She had a lot of health problems. I'm sure probably due to her strokes. She had left her nursing home on August 31st, and she actually called her attorney to ask if she could leave because her daughters were like, no, keep her in the nursing home. She's like, I want to be here. Let me go home. And she's like, I can pay for someone to take care of me at home. And the daughters didn't want her. They were trying to say, no, she needs to be there. And she called her own attorney and was like, I need you to put this like in my legal papers. You know, she has this in there. And the daughters, had placed her in the nursing home after her last stroke. And she had been like in a coma. So that's why she was initially placed there.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So that's why she was initially placed in the nursing home, because obviously you have to be hospitalized if you're in a coma.
Yeah, but I mean, she sounds like a pretty tough lady. She had all this stuff happen to her. And so to give up, if they're saying she did it to herself, I mean, to give up would just be horrible because she fought so hard for so long.
I know. So they had said like the daughter and the decedent have been arguing a lot recently. That was over like trying to sell the farm and whether or not like she needed to be in the nursing home. She had been to the hospital twice for her knee pain, but the doctor wouldn't give her like pain meds because she was on so many other meds and they didn't want them like necessarily mixing.
Or the daughter's getting a hold of it.
Well, that could be too. No one does that, Kelly. So yeah, she had all these problems. I think she even had like a blood clot in her veins or something or whatever. That's basically how she ended up back home. And so the daughters, it kind of seemed like didn't want to take care of her anymore. And there's kind of like, we don't want her to sell the farm. We know she has all this money. We want to grow our pot here. Just all seems super weird, right? I also asked the sheriff, I was like, by the way, when you guys got here, did you notice if they like had blood on their clothes or anything? And they're like, oh, for real? And they said, oh, well, they said they changed. I was like, so there was blood on their clothes. I was like, where are their clothes? They knew that they had blood on their clothes.
But how did they have blood on their clothes?
Well, they said, well, then we went to check on mom whenever the son-in-law, whatever, came in.
Did you have blood on your clothes?
Well, of course I did. I always do.
I know, but when you first went in to check on her, did you get blood on your clothes?
Me, myself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
How could you not? There was so much blood. It was everywhere, on the floor.
I was just wondering if it was the same type of thing.
Well, then I asked them. I felt very clever for this. I said, was there blood spatter on the daughter's legs? And they said, oh, yes, there was blood on her legs. And I was like, hello? Yeah. And I was like, did you take pictures of that? And you know what they said?
No.
They said, no.
The daughter didn't even wipe it off before they got there?
No, she waited. And she wiped it off with that same washcloth.
What?
Yes, Kelly. Seriously. If you listen to Small Town Murder, they talk about like the bumbling police forces, which is not everywhere, mind you. But I'm like, why would you let her back in there? Well, I'm in there. Let me just wipe off this gun a little bit more. Wipe off my fingerprints. Stupid. No. I was like, well, there goes your case. There it goes. She's walking away.
So you asked about the blood spotter.
Yeah, I told you she wiped it off with that washcloth, the same one. I was like, well, you got no pictures of it, so you're dumb. Anyways, didn't take me 6 hours to figure that out, but that's just me. Anyways, I do my thing, load her up, get her shipped out, go up to the office, do an autopsy. We do a full autopsy, right? Suspicious and everything. And that's why they're putting it up to every news station for a long time. And even when I talked to the daughters, they weren't even crying. No one was crying. Not a tear. Not a tear. They weren't even trying to fake cry. Even usually people that are suspicious try to fake cry and it's like no tears, but they like still try to fake cry. I've had so many of those people that are like fake criers that like we've had to call ambulance to the scene because they like, we call them flop, drop, and roll or Jesus floppers because it's, oh no, Jesus. And they like flop and roll is what we call it. And then it's like, okay.
Unless they knew that they didn't do anything, but I still think it's sad that someone's not crying over you.
Yeah, right? I'm like, it's your mom. You were living with her too. I mean, you had to have been somewhat close for her to like entrust you to take care of her, right?
And even the shock of seeing a dead body.
Well, I looked at the sheriff and was like, well, hey, everyone grieves differently, but this is not the reaction that I was expecting. And some people are like, well, she was mean as whatever. I'm like, I mean, still, I don't know. Who am I to judge? I just work here. I just work here. So anyways, I'm doing my follow-up duties as I do. After the cases worked by the doctors. They're still treating this as suspicious, right? And they're like, hey, do your follow-ups with the sheriff's department and call the nursing home, right? Because at this point, they're like, well, why was the daughter and mom fighting? And so I'm calling the sheriff's department and stuff and this and that. It's back and forth. Well, the undersheriff apparently now, days later, had contacted the nursing staff and they said she had made comments to staff and doctors about wanting to shoot herself.
Oh.
And they had contacted mental health about her statements as well. So I said, okay, well, how many times did this occur? And they said, well, a couple times. I was like, okay, well, why? And they said, well, because she was in so much pain and she couldn't get her pain medications from her doctor. And I'm like, I still don't buy it, though, that she like did this. And so I'm like talking to the doctors, because me and the doctors are all like, there's no way that this woman who has essentially one hand at this time, because she's paralyzed on her left side, I'm like, there's no way that this woman can shoot that gun with her one hand. There is no way, Kelly. I could not do that. There's no way. I was like, I think that this is like an assisted suicide. So I said, I think one of the daughters played dumb. And I said, I think that the daughter went in there and helped her hold the gun, or either held the gun for her and put it to her chest. I said, I think that's why the gun was also washed off afterwards and in the sink.
It's in the sink. That's the whole thing. And the daughter had blood splatter, so she was clearly there when it happened.
Yeah. And like even asking things, I was like, okay, these are other things too. And whenever you have a bathroom scene like that with lots of blood, you always check under the toilet lids to see if there's blood spatter or any blood streaking, because the toilet seats were completely down with the lid down, and I lifted it up and there was blood streaks there.
Oh, so someone had gone in there afterwards.
Interesting. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, so there's like all these things that are not making sense. So this is reasons 101 why like you need a death investigator. This is our job. This is the whole reason why you go to a scene, is to do this stuff, because stuff like this does not add up. Like you have to like look at every angle of these things. And I'm like, there's no way. And so I was like, you guys tell me that she did this to herself. And I was like, I will literally pay you like $1 million, because I do not believe it. I was like, there's no way this woman, first of all, held it with one hand in the position where this void is at. To get any type of leverage, she would have had to either be leaned up against a sink, which I'm like trying to think about how she could have even collapsed into that position. I think that she could have been like even in a seated position with her back up against the wall, and that someone was crouched down and helped her shoot, and then kind of helped her lay over.
Right.
And then picked up the gun and put it up. That's why the toilet seat, because they would have used the toilet seat to help push themselves back up. I'm like, there's no way that this woman did this to herself by herself. Yeah, she might have had the suicidal ideations, but you can't put that size gun in someone's hand and tell me that she did that.
She had to walk there.
Yes, which she would have had to have assistance in that as well. The sheriff's department said, we're no longer treating this as suspicious. And that's when the doctors are like, okay, well, if you're not treating this as suspicious any longer, we can't put that as an option. So they put suicide.
No.
The doctor agreed with me. They were like, this is really weird, because assisted suicide is still murder in most states. I think there's maybe 6 states that assisted suicide is not considered homicide.
Yeah, because what if someone changes their mind and you don't know if they change their mind or not?
There's like podcasts about, I think it's Criminal, that they talked about this once. And I thought it was really interesting, because there's actually this book that talks about ways to die, to kill yourself.
Oh, well, that's horrible.
Yeah, right. But these people, they usually have these books next to them in these certain situations like that, where they have like a assisted suicide. But they have these people that are there with them. And of course, it's illegal. These people have been arrested or whatever. But I know like Washington for sure is a state that's legal now.
California might be.
I don't think it is yet. I think Washington, Oregon, can't remember all of them off the top of my head. I remember doing research on it, but I still very much believe that this case, and I will go to my grave like believing that this is what this is, because they look too guilty. Everything else looked too weird. I have seen too many gunshot wound cases to know there's no way.
I also want to know now, we might not be able to do this because it's pretty far from where you live, but I want to know if they have their weed farm now, or if they ended up selling the farm or not. You probably know the address, so you could find out if it's sold or not.
I cannot confirm nor deny that I have these things.
Maybe we find out, like, where are they now, or following up on the episodes, if they sold the farm or not. But yeah, man, that's a bummer, because that lady seemed really tough. I'm not saying that she wouldn't pull the trigger anyway, but
I just don't buy it. I'm like, there's no way. There's no way. She could have even paid for someone to come into her home and help take care of her, especially because she still had her, which I've had cases like this where people are perfectly healthy and have their minds but they still do it because their loved one that they've been married to for 60 years ended up getting dementia, which is really, really sad. So I don't buy it. I'm still on that. She didn't do it just to herself. There's no way. Because I am wholly in the belief that I know if I can't handle that gun by myself, she certainly could not.
I agree. Oh, that's crazy. It's an unsolved mystery.
That's how I feel. He needs to be a reopened case. Personally, that's my opinion.
Ooh, Amy, maybe we reopen it.
And say, I just work here, but I just don't work there anymore. So.
That was good. Before we finish, I just want to say there's a podcast out there now. I don't know if it's from True Crime Podcast or what, but it's called The Bakersfield 3. It's our hometown.
Yeah, our homie balonies.
So I've been listening to it, and the case, I think, started in 2018. Anyway, super interesting if you guys are listening to True Crime Podcast and want something else. It's Olivia LaVoice. She was a Bakersfield, I think, 17 news.
Oh.
Yeah, so she's redoing it. And I haven't finished, so I don't know if the case is closed or not. But so far, it's been a really good podcast. It's like a series of, I don't know, 10 or 15.
Yeah, those are really interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, it's short and sweet, something to listen to. And if you guys have any recommendations for us to listen to, let us know too. You guys can email us.
Send questions.
Yeah, send us questions.
We want to know who you are. New Mexico, strangers.
Yeah, we have some interesting downloads, but no matter what, we do appreciate you guys listening and thank you for your support. And until next time.
Bye.